Today, Martin Luther King III, that's the son of Martin Luther King Jr., a global human rights activist, he carries on his father's legacy, stating that it's only the beginning of the work that has been done. He begs us not to idolize his father, but to carry on his legacy, because he writes, the poor and disenfranchised, too often those in communities of color, still disproportionately bear society's harms through no fault of their own. That truth has compelled the fight for social justice across the spectrum: labor rights, women's rights, and environmental rights. Because no matter who we are or where we come from, we are entitled to the basic human rights of clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and healthy land to call home. Make no mistake, the injustice of climate change and the pollution that fuels it are among this century's most debilitating engines of equality. In our gathering video today, Imagine Dragons, which is a band from Las Vegas, so I kind of imported them here with me from Las Vegas, so I thought that was kind of cool. And I listened to the song like 15 times coming across the desert, but that has nothing to do with any diagnosis that's in the DSM. It's just that the song is really cool. But in the song and in the video, it talks about pain, and pain is a constant in life. And one of the things that I really like about that video that we had in our gathering music was, one, I'm a real big kid of the 80s, so it has Drago from Rocky in it, right? And there's that part where there's the break and he says, I want to stop. And he says, we can't, right? We can't stop. There's these points. Can you guys still hear me? Because I'm not sure if my mic is on when I step away. Okay, so there's points in the journey where the pain makes you want to stop, where the pain forces you sometimes to stop. But we have to go on, and that's what's so well illustrated in the song from our gathering music, that we can go on. And so today I want to issue a challenge to us, and the challenge is to actually be the change, right? There's the famous quote that the Mahatma has, and they say that Ghandi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And we were putting together in our worship committee, what are we going to do for 2023? And I said, well, I like this quote, and so let's be the change. And then how are we going to be the change as Unitarian Universalists? And in this period of transition we're in, so I said, well, we have these 7 principles, and there's 12 months, and 7 doesn't divide very nicely into 12, but it fills up some of the blocks as you go through the 12 months. So I said, let's do a Be the Change challenge, and let's challenge ourselves to look at our principles, look at the things that we affirm and provoke, and see how we can live those principles, and how living those principles perhaps can infuse some energy and some momentum in the things that are happening here at the UUFLB. So an interesting thing's happened since I decided to go to seminary. This has never happened in my 5 years as a UU, but ever since I decided to go to seminary, people keep asking me, what is Unitarian Universalism and what do Unitarians believe? Nobody ever asked me that question. They were just like, Don goes somewhere on Sunday and that's cool. But as soon as I decided to say that I was going to be a minister of the Unitarian Universalist faith, people keep asking that question. And so we have our 7 principles, and I was a little bit surprised. I didn't know this. I don't know if you guys know that the 7 principles, they haven't been around since the 1770s. I didn't know that. I thought, wow, these 7 principles, they're so awesome. They're so amazing. They must have been around forever. And now that I'm on this theological path of study, I go to the Google and I ask Google about the 7 principles, because I said, we're going to do this challenge. And when did these 7 principles come into being, right? And I learned a couple of things. I learned, one, that in the 60s, when Unitarian Universalists came together, they created this platform, and it really didn't include the women. And there was a lot of tension because the language was very gender specific, and we've come to realize that language is very important. And all that to say, I think it was 1983, 1984, in the 1980s, when the principles that we now affirm and promote that were so awesome when I first walked in the back and sat down and read, they've only been around since the 1980s. And so I'm on the Google because that's a really, really trustworthy source, I want you to know. And Google pointed me to a UU World article that is now 10 years old. So it was 15 years after the passage and the adoption of the principles. And it was talking about the challenges the principles had endured over the 15 years, and that they had almost become ubiquitous with Unitarian Universalism. That it pointed out in the article that the principles are printed in the hymnal, that they adorn many churches like they do here in our entrance, and we print them on the back of our order of service. So it's become something that we organize around. And also, there was an article that I found that said that there was a danger of the principles becoming a creed for Unitarian Universalists. And one of the things that it always says that there are no specific creed or any specific set of beliefs that Unitarian Universalists hold or promote. But let's come back to the first principle. The first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So our country has a very unique history. We had a civil war that was fought in part around the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the failure for there to be a consensus among all of our nation about what that meant. Back in May of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, it was a traumatic event. I had just moved to Henderson, and there's a term that's come about called a snuff film, right? And I learned this because of the movies. And a snuff film is a film when a murder is captured on tape and people are able to watch it, and that's what a snuff film is. And so in May of 2020, I realized that I was watching a snuff film, and so many other people were watching it, and it impacted me in a way that I felt very alone. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and I left Huntsville, Alabama in 1992 to go off into the United States Navy, and they sent me to boot camp in San Diego. And for the most part, I've been in and out of California ever since then, but far away from my family in Alabama. And if you know anything about the geography of where we live here in Orange County, I've lived in Newport Beach and Laguna Beach most of the time that I was here. My first job was at a firm up in Newport Beach. And so George Floyd impacted me. And I felt as though I was on an island. And the cool thing is, one of the things that helped me heal and helped me move through that was the community here at the UU of Laguna Beach. Reverend Lee Marie, I don't even know exactly how it came about, but she said, you know, why don't we do a film series? And in the summer of 2020, we did a social justice film series. And we invited other congregations from Orange County, and we watched those films together. And it was healing for me. And it became instructive because I became acutely aware of certain things that I had always been aware in society, but I started to ask some questions. And so the inherent dignity and worth of every person. And so I'm sharing with you how I was able to understand and to see how we might not be living up to that ideal through the illustration of George Floyd. And then I think about how I identify. I identify as a Black, heterosexual, cis, able-bodied male, right? And some of what I'm saying and some of the context of the Martin Luther King holiday and reflections show that in my Blackness, there are some challenges in the society and the construct that we're in. But what's also baked into this self-identification is the privilege of being male, right? And although I don't have all of the privileges of a cis white male in this society, in this construct, I've realized that I have a lot of privileges just by being male. And then through a lot of my development, I was an athlete, and I was a very good athlete. So that gave me another set of privileges on top of that. And Jason Garcia, who was one of my mentors in my mental health journey, he said, "You're also a man's man." And I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think there might be some privileges in whatever that is as well. And so I share all that with you because then I started to realize that I have privileges, and that those privileges put me in a situation vis-a-vis some others that might give me a responsibility, because the privileges are just baked into the cake in a way that we might not really be able to recognize. And so I'm going to share this as an example, and this is me being really vulnerable and telling you guys some secrets. So in the mid-1990s, I was at Florida State University, and I took this class called The Philosophy of Feminism. And I'm going to say that was about 1995. So if we do the math, that was 28 years ago, I took this Philosophy of Feminism class. And now this is a really interesting psychological phenomenon that happened within my mind. I took that class and I checked this huge box, boom, of being an ally to feminism and knowing things about feminism. And I was all in because I took this class. And then something really cool happened in that class. For whatever reason, what was going on, there was a candlelight vigil at midnight. And I had a candle and I marched. And for about 25 or 26 years, I held on to the fact that I had that candle and I marched. And I thought I had done all the work that I needed to do to be a great ally to all of my sisters out there, including my biological sisters, because I had taken that one class. And so What I'm going to challenge you to do is to think about how that might apply to something in your journey. Because I've had people tell me, oh, that's sexist, or that's that, or that's that. And every time, at least in the back of my mind, I said, I took this class, so they're wrong. Because I'm exempt because I took the class. And what I realize is that was 28 years ago. And there's a time where you have to reflect and do a serious assessment of self and say, where do I stand on this? And what have I done with this? And so my own self-report, and this is where, don't tell anybody, and if you're watching this on YouTube, don't share it. I hadn't done any work for 28 years, really, to improve myself and to see until the Me Too movement started making me look. And with the empathy that had been forced out of me through the George Floyd experience, I had to look and say, where do I have privilege and where can I be a better ally? So I challenge you, and whatever has been your journey, is there something that you did 28 years ago that you might be holding on to, that you might say, I checked that box, I got that one all cleaned up, it's all done? Because it's about the habits that we develop. And Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal religion, which means you don't have to hold a specific set of beliefs to be welcomed into our community. We embrace theological diversity. We have people who profess strong Christian backgrounds, Jewish backgrounds, atheist backgrounds, mystical backgrounds, so many backgrounds, but a common thread, a commonality is that we understand that our job description is to be responsible and caring stewards of the earth during our lifetime. On our Zoom at Noon group that meets on Mondays, we started having a conversation because Paul shared about Dr. Wayne Dyer. And Dr. Wayne Dyer is one of my favorite teachers. And one of the things that Wayne Dyer often says is that he's a spirit having a human experience. And having that human experience, we have to determine what and how we're going to contribute to this walk. We have the privilege of being a block off of the ocean. And I went out and I looked at the ocean, and there's this huge ocean, and it's a little bit aggravated because there's weather. So there's big waves, and all we can be is 1 ounce of love in that great big ocean. And each action that we create becomes a contribution to that ocean. And so when I think about where I have deficiencies in being an ally as a feminist thinker, a feminist activist, I see opportunities for myself. And we must choose to enter into wander and grieving and labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. In order to transform the world around us, we need to see more and more kinds of people as part of us. And if we don't see them as part of us, we need to see them as part of us that we don't know yet. We need to see them as our siblings. And so the challenge in the inherent worth and dignity every day and living that is, how do we engage our community, and how do we engage our neighbors? How do we engage one another in a way that creates something different than what exists today. When I started out, I started talking about how we come together as a team and everybody plays their role. And we have to envision a future for this place. We have to have an idea about where we're gonna go with this place. So in our Be the Change challenge, as we go through the next 6 principles and go into examining the 7th principle, I leave it as a challenge to do a serious self-assessment of how did we get here in the spirit of Martin Luther King. It's 1861 is the beginnings of the Civil War. It's now 2023. The 1960s were the civil rights movement, and John Lewis left us with the challenge to be getting in good trouble, which he was able to do up until the week before his passing in his 80s. So next week, I didn't get to the announcement slides earlier, I just realized. But next week we have Jackie Nunez is going to be joining us here. And one of the things that she's able to bring to us is a connection to the land and the fact that we're stewards. It was Reverend Tom Owen Toll who gave the job description that I referenced earlier. It's kind of cool that he's been with us, I think 3 or 4 times since I've been a member. And each time he leaves a special piece of energy and a special thought, as well as he sets up with his books, so he always leaves a tome or 2. But he said our job description is to be responsible and caring stewards of the earth during our lifetime. And in the next few weeks, as we go this afternoon, as we do whatever it is that we're going to do this year in 2023 to honor and participate in Martin Luther King Jr. Day and the holiday that will be celebrated and observed tomorrow, I want you to think about and do an assessment of what is it in your journey that, like me, is that class from 1995 that you've been holding on to? What is it that you can do differently? And how can we make the inherent worth and dignity something that people are able to say, that's what they do there? That's the challenge I leave for us today. Namaste.